Hi, I'm Matt from Untrained Terrain, and today we're going to be talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. Born May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jeffrey Dahmer was the first of two boys to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. Jeffrey's father was a chemistry student, and his mother was a teletype machine instructor, which is basically like emails before emails. The family lived in suburban Milwaukee in Dahmer's early years, and his childhood was filled with, well, people said he was odd. Some sources close to the family say that Jeffrey was deprived of attention, while other sources say that he was doted on as an early toddler and a young child. Now, when Jeffrey was in first grade, his father worked a lot, and his mother was a stay-at-home mom, and she was depressed, she was a hypochondriac, she even tried to commit suicide once by taking a bunch of pills. Now, during this point in his childhood, Jeffrey was feeling really alone, and he really craved attention from his parents, which he didn't really get. Now, Jeffrey would undergo a double hernia surgery just shy of the age of 4. In his early years of school, some of his teachers stated that he seemed alone and would admit signs of abandonment. He stated in an interview later in his life that he was unsure of the solidity of his family. While he was in elementary school, Dahmer didn't like to have a lot of friends, and he spent a lot of his time alone. In October 1966, the family uprooted and moved to Doyle, Ohio. And shortly after this, Jeffrey's second brother, David, was born. Now, Jeffrey's parents even let him name the new baby, which I thought was odd. I mean, who lets a 6-year-old name their unborn child? But I guess that's what happened. From his early childhood, Jeffrey grew a fascination with dead animals. And this started after seeing his father remove animal bones from beneath the family's home. According to his father, Jeffrey liked the sound that the bones made when they clinked together. And Jeffrey would later say that he spent a lot of his time searching for bones, and even searched for bones in live animals. In May 1968, the family moved yet again, this time to Bath Township, Ohio. Now, there was a little hut close to the woods on the property, and Jeffrey would begin collecting squirrel and chipmunk bones and keeping them in this hut. He would even start preserving animal parts in jars of formaldehyde and keeping them in this hut close to the woods. Now, seeing this as a fascination with bones and potentially a career field when he got older, Jeffrey's father taught him how to properly bleach and preserve animal bones. I mean, looking back, I don't know how good of an idea this was, but that's what happened. That's what he did. Shortly after this, Dahmer began collecting roadkill and dead animals, and eventually even started killing the animals himself and burying the carcasses behind the hut on his parents' property. According to one family friend, Jeffrey would decapitate a dog and nail the body to a tree and later show this body nailed to a tree to his friend as a prank. When Jeffrey was a freshman at Revere High School in Bath Township, Ohio, his friends would say that he was distant and he behaved oddly. Around this time, Jeffrey would get into heavy drinking and drinking hard liquor, and he would even keep it in his jacket so he could drink during school hours. Now keep in mind, he was a freshman while all this was starting, so... Now, around the time his puberty started, Jeffrey had a secret relationship with another boy. Although nothing sexual happened, he began to have a fascination with dominating and having submissive male partners. Now, when he was 16, Jeffrey later stated that he came up with a plan to attack a certain male jogger while he was jogging down the road. He even hid in the bushes with a hammer, but luckily for this jogger, he did not pass by on that day. By the time he was 17, his grades diminished and he was doing very poorly in school, leading to his parents hiring a private tutor, which really didn't do much. I mean, his grades just kept going down and down. Now, after an affair, in September 1977, Jeffrey's parents decided to have a divorce. In May 1978, Jeffrey finally graduated high school, even though his grades were low, and at this time he was becoming more and more of an alcoholic and needing alcohol more and more daily to keep up with his daily tasks. Shortly after Jeffrey graduated, his mother took his brothers and moved to Chippewa Falls, Ohio, and left Jeffrey in the family home. 3 weeks after being left alone in the family home, Jeffrey committed his first murder. 18-year-old Stephen Hicks would be hitchhiking, and Jeffrey would pick him up and take him home on the promise of male intercourse. He later, after drinking with him for a while, beat him to death with a 10-pound dumbbell. That August, Jeffrey enrolled in university, and because of his drinking, his plans for university were futile, and he eventually flunked out. In January 1979, after the insisting of his father, Jeffrey would enroll in the United States military. He would undergo basic training in Fort McClellan in Anniston, Alabama. Afterwards, he would train as a medical specialist in Fort San Antonio in San Antonio, Texas. Jeffrey was later deployed to Baumhauer, West Germany in 1979. In March 1981, after being deemed unfit to be a soldier, Jeffrey received an honorable discharge because of his drinking. Jeffrey returned home to Ohio to live with his father later the same year. In December 1981, Jeffrey's father and his girlfriend sent Jeffrey to live with Jeffrey's father's mother, Jeffrey's grandmother. He later found a job as a phlebotomist at the Blood Plasma Clinic in Milwaukee, and he later, of course, was fired because of his drinking. Now, in January 1985, Jeffrey was hired as a chocolate mixer at the Milwaukee Chocolate Factory. Around this time, Jeffrey began to familiarize himself with the town's gay bars, the gay bathhouses, and bookstores in search of men. Jeffrey would later state that he would view his partners as objects instead of people, and this would lead to him drugging them and taking advantage of them when they were unconscious. On September 8, 1986, Jeffrey was arrested for pleasuring himself in front of two 12-year-old boys, and he would receive 1 year of probation for this. On November 20th, 1987, Jeffrey would meet his second victim, Stephen Tuomi, and he would later lure him to his hotel room. According to Dahmer, he only planned on drugging him and having sex with his unconscious body, but he awoke in the morning and found him laying there dead with blood coming out of the corner of his mouth. Jeffrey would dispose of his body in a large suitcase that he took to his grandmother's house after dissecting the body and taking off the head and arms and legs. Now, he would later say that this was like the pivot point in his life where he would just stop trying and he would just give in to his urges and he would stop trying to resist them. On March 20th, Jeffrey would move back into his grandmother's home after taking 10 days off for Easter. During his stay at his grandmother's, Dahmer met 24-year-old Anthony Sears, and he sadly lured him to his grandmother's house and killed him. He would later dismember the body in his grandmother's bathtub, later keeping the head and genitals in a jar of acetone and keeping it in his work locker. Now, on May 14th, 1990, Dahmer would move into his final apartment on 924 25th Street. He would move into apartment 213, taking the head and genitals and the acetone with him. Within a week of being in the apartment, Dahmer lured and drugged 32-year-old Raymond Smith and would kill him and also keep his head next to Sears' head in a filing cabinet in his home. During the next 3 months after this, Dahmer would claim 3 more victims. His next victim was 22-year-old Ernest Miller, who he lured to his apartment on the promise of $50 for letting Jeffrey listen to his heart and stomach. He later wrapped Miller's flesh in plastic and put it in his freezer for later consumption. 3 weeks after this, Dahmer would lure 22-year-old David Thomas to his house, who sadly met the same fate as Miller. Dahmer then didn't kill for 5 months, with several unsuccessful attempts to lure people to his apartment. In February 1991, Dahmer met 17-year-old Curtis Strouter, who he lured to his apartment on the promise of taking nude photographs for money. Less than 2 months later, Dahmer found 19-year-old Errol Lindsay, and he also lured him to his apartment on the promise of taking nude photographs for money. Now, this is where the story takes a sick turn, as Jeffrey drilled a hole into his temple and injected acid to try to make some sort of, sex dummy, like a sex slave zombie. He later lured 2 more victims to his apartment and failed using the same technique to try to make zombies. Now, during this time, the other tenants in his apartment building noticed a really foul smell coming from Jeffrey's apartment, and they said it was emanating, like it was something dead in there. And they stated this to the landlord, and the landlord investigated. Jeffrey would tell the landlord that his pet goldfish died and that he would take care of it, and the landlord agreed. May 26, 1991, Dahmer encountered 14-year-old Konorak Synthesynphone and lured him on the promise of money to his apartment. After drugging him, Dahmer drilled and injected hydrochloric acid into his skull, rendering him handicapped. Dahmer then left him and went to a bar. Upon returning, Dahmer found the young man sitting on the corner of the road talking to 3 women who stated that they called 911. Upon officers arriving at the scene, Jeffrey just told them that it was his 19-year-old boyfriend who had had too much to drink and allowed him to walk back to his apartment where he would later kill him.
Noticeable thing about it was the fact that he was nude.
This woman's daughter saw the boy running out of Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment building that night, screaming and bleeding. And the boy's family, who came to America full of hope only 10 years ago, learned today that when police arrived at the scene, they believed Dahmer's story, that the child was actually his 19-year-old lover with whom he was having a spat.
By July 1991, Dahmer would lure and kill 3 more victims after this young man. Jeffrey met up with these 3 guys at a bus stop and was like, hey guys, one of you can come back to my apartment and I'll take nude photographs of you and I'll give you $50. And one of the guys decided that he would do this and went back with Jeffrey to his apartment. Now, after entering Jeffrey's apartment, Jeffrey brandished a knife on the man, even trying to handcuff him. Luckily for the man, he was able to convince Jeffrey to let them sit in the living room where it was cooler, as the man said. And when Jeffrey was distracted, the man punched Jeffrey in the face, ran out the front door, and flagged down police immediately. When the police arrived at the apartment, Jeffrey let them have a look inside, and one of the police officers found the knife that the man claimed Jeffrey had brandished upon him, and also found photographs of Jeffrey with nude victims, and even showed the other officer the photographs, claiming these are for real. When Jeffrey was confronted with this, there was a brief struggle, and Jeffrey was arrested on the spot.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory. This was the scene earlier this morning. Police hired a private contractor to haul a refrigerator and a tank of acid out of the apartment in the 900 block of North 25th Street. Because of the acid, some neighbors were evacuated briefly. Police found parts of bodies, leading them to believe the man they arrested is a mass murderer.
From our investigation, we feel that this individual strongly is involved in other homicides. We have taken evidence out of the building by the medical examiner to be examined.
What brought the police here in the first place?
The officers were stopped by an individual who claimed he was in the apartment and became engaged in a dispute with the owner of the apartment and left the apartment and called the officers.
The trial lasted for 2 weeks with witnesses from both the prosecution and the defense. Jeffrey was later found guilty on all 14 counts of murder, and it was also ruled that he was not mentally ill during the times of the offenses.
Your Honor, it is over now. This has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. Now I believe I was sick. The doctors have told me about my sickness, and now I have some peace. I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. My attempt to help identify the remains was the best that I could do, and that was hardly anything. I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate.
Dahmer closed the proceeding with a statement saying, "I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get for what I have done." Dahmer was sentenced to 14 life sentences plus 70 years for the horrors he committed, as there was no death penalty in Wisconsin. However, on the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer and 2 fellow inmates were taken to the gym showers to clean on work detail. Dahmer had his head beaten with a 20-inch steel bar from the gym and died 2 weeks later as a result.